On a bright June afternoon in 1944, a quiet French village, seemingly untouched by the war, became the scene of one of its most tragic events. Just 4 days after the D-Day landings brought a fragile wave of hope, that hope was extinguished in a storm of fire and sorrow. An entire community, men, women, and children, was systematically erased in hours, their homes turned to ash, their very existence wiped from the map with terrifying precision. This wasn't a battle. There were no soldiers here, no fortress to take. It was simply a village of farmers, shopkeepers, and families. So, what could possibly lead an elite division to commit such an unthinkable act against hundreds of unsuspecting civilians? The answer is a dark and chilling story of calculated retaliation, a merciless doctrine of fear, and a terrifying mistake that sealed the fate of over 600 innocent people. While official reports would later be filled with lies, the ruins left behind would tell the real, unspoken story, a silent testament to a tragedy so profound it had to be seen to be believed. Deep in the heart of France, the village of Oradour-sur-Glane was an island of tranquility in a sea of war, a place where the echoes of distant battles rarely disturbed the peace. While the conflict raged across Europe, life here followed a gentle rhythm. The town tram would arrive from Limoges, bringing visitors and whispered news. In the town square, the laughter of children at play mixed with the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, creating a symphony of peaceful, everyday life. Families gathered for midday meals, the comforting scent of baking bread drifting from the local boulangerie. They knew about the war, of course, listening to forbidden radio broadcasts and sharing hopeful whispers about the Allied landings in Normandy. A fragile hope was blooming that the 4 long years of occupation might finally be ending. But for them, the war still felt distant, an abstract problem for soldiers on faraway fronts. They had no idea that a fateful mission was already underway, and that the cold gears of a powerful machine were grinding slowly but surely in their direction. This was no ordinary military unit. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, was forged in a crucible of severe doctrine and hardened on the harsh Eastern Front. Its soldiers were not just fighters, they were instruments of a merciless ideology that saw civilians as tools or obstacles. In the East, they had perfected anti-partisan warfare, a chilling euphemism for the brutal suppression of any population merely suspected of harboring resistance. They left a trail of ruined homes and devastation, becoming infamous for a level of calculated severity that shocked even other army units. Now, in June 1944, they were redeployed to France with a terrifying dual purpose. Their official orders were to reinforce the crumbling lines in Normandy. But first, they were given a more sinister task: to subdue the French interior and stamp out the growing French resistance with such overwhelming force that no one would ever dare to help them again. Their advance was deliberately slow and methodical, designed to make a gruesome example of anyone who stood in their way. The trigger for the horror that would unfold was a toxic cocktail of cold-blooded, high-level orders and a burning thirst for personal revenge. As the French resistance intensified its attacks after D-Day, the High Command grew desperate. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt issued a now infamous directive: crush the resistance with swift and ruthless initiative, carrying out all operations with the greatest severity. This was a blank check for extreme measures. Just 1 day before the events at Oradour, the division had already acted on these orders, carrying out a public reprisal against 99 men in the nearby town of Toul. But for one commander, the fight was about to become deeply personal. Sturmbannführer Adolf Diekmann received word that his close friend, Helmut Kempfe, had been captured by the Maquis. Vicious rumors, though never proven, claimed Kempfe had met a terrible fate by fire. This ignited a furious rage in Diekmann, who vowed to retaliate. It's widely believed his initial target was another village, Oradour-sur-Glane, where resistance activity was known. But through a fateful error or a deliberate choice we will never fully understand, his convoy turned toward the wrong village, the peaceful, unsuspecting Oradour-sur-Glane. On the afternoon of June 10th, the familiar hum of village life was shattered by the roar of military engines. Around 200 soldiers rolled into Oradour-sur-Glane, blocking every road and sealing the village completely. A town crier was forced to walk the streets, his voice trembling as he ordered everyone to assemble in the town square for a supposed identity paper check. The villagers, confused but conditioned to obey, complied. They brought their children from their homes and playgrounds, some mothers carrying infants in their arms. The local schoolmaster calmly led his pupils to the square, assuring them it was just a minor disruption. But then, the atmosphere shifted from tense to terrifying. The officers forcibly separated the men from the women and children. The men were marched off to different barns, while the crying women and children were herded into the ancient stone church. An officer falsely accused the men of hiding supplies for the resistance. A frantic search of the houses turned up nothing. But it didn't matter. The decision had already been made. As the heavy oak doors of the church were bolted shut from the outside, a soul-crushing realization dawned. This was not a document check. What happened next moved far beyond military intimidation into unimaginable tragedy. Inside the 6 barns, the soldiers positioned their weapons. Their initial actions were not for a quick end, but to prevent any escape. After the initial volley of sound, they moved among the wounded, using accelerants on them and the hay-strewn floors before setting the structures on fire. The air filled with sounds of unimaginable suffering as the buildings were consumed by flames. A few desperate souls who tried to crawl from the inferno were met with more force. Miraculously, 6 men survived, buried beneath their friends and neighbors, remaining motionless as the fire raged above them. The soldiers placed a large device near the nave. When it detonated, it filled the sacred space with thick, suffocating smoke but failed to bring the building down. As panicked mothers, clutching their children, scrambled for the doors and windows, they were met with a relentless barrage from outside. Those who weren't hit succumbed to the thick, black smoke. Finally, the soldiers entered the church, leaving no chance for survival before setting the wooden pews on fire. The ancient roof collapsed in a shower of flame and stone. In the midst of this chaos, only one person made it out. A 47-year-old woman named Marguerite Roufange climbed through a broken window and, though wounded, managed to hide until nightfall, the sole survivor of the church. When the smoke finally cleared, an entire village had been erased. In the immediate aftermath, the command scrambled to fabricate a cover story. Official reports brazenly claimed the villagers had been caught in the crossfire of a fierce battle, or that a secret supply cache in the church had accidentally exploded. These were blatant falsehoods. When Allied forces and the French government reached the area weeks later, they found not a battlefield, but a scene of profound tragedy. War photographers documented every chilling detail: the burned-out shell of the church, the rusted chassis of the doctor's car, a child's sewing machine melted onto a tabletop. The handful of survivors gave their harrowing statements, their voices trembling but resolute. The world finally saw what had happened at Oradour-sur-Glane, and the village's name instantly became a byword for wartime barbarism. The lie of a fair fight was utterly exposed, revealing the terrible truth of a premeditated event. Justice, however, would prove to be agonizingly slow and deeply unsatisfying. The division was thrown into the fighting in Normandy, where it suffered catastrophic losses. Adolphe Diekmann, the commander who led the terrible events, was lost in combat less than 3 weeks later, forever escaping a court of law. His superior, Heinz Lammerding, who gave the overarching orders, was sentenced in absentia by a French court but escaped to West Germany, which refused to extradite him. He lived out his life as a successful businessman, dying a free man in 1971. In 1953, a trial was held for 21 surviving members of the unit, but it was fraught with controversy. 14 of the accused were Alsatians who claimed they had been forced into service. Despite convictions, a wave of political outrage led to a general amnesty, and within a few years, all of them were free. For the survivors of Oradour, This was a profound betrayal. The men who had destroyed their families had walked away unpunished. In response, the French government made a solemn decision. Oradour-sur-Glane would not be rebuilt. It would be preserved exactly as the soldiers had left it, a national memorial, a ghost village frozen in time. And so, the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane remain today as a permanent, haunting warning written in stone and ash. It stands as a symbol not just of wartime cruelty, but of the terrifying abyss that opens when ideology replaces conscience and blind obedience becomes the highest virtue. The horror of that day wasn't born from the chaos of battle. It was a planned, disciplined, and efficient operation of complete destruction. In just a few hours, 642 lives, including 197 men, 240 women, and 205 children, were systematically taken. Their village was not just defeated, it was erased, intended to be forgotten. But while the perpetrators sought to erase it, their very act of destruction instead made it immortal. The memory of what happened there now serves as a powerful, lingering question. In any conflict, how many other silent villages have been condemned simply because a distant commander decided they were suspects? And how do we properly remember those who had no part in the fight but were forced to pay the ultimate price? If you leave today thinking of just one image, let it be the rusted, abandoned bicycle of a child lying in a ruined street, a frozen, heartbreaking moment of a life interrupted without reason. That is the undeniable truth of Oradour-sur-Glane, a truth that our shared humanity demands must never be forgotten. Thank you for watching.